Hey, what's going on guys, Khraze here and welcome back to some more Outriders updates. Today we actually have some really big news because another large update is actually on the way, a follow-up patch that will contain a lot of the fixes that were kinda left behind because of the issues in the past week. So we will talk about that and a ton of other dev responses from the past 12 hours, so let's jump right into it. Before jumping in though, I want to give a huge shout out to World of Demons. I was already really impressed with this game, so imagine my surprise when they offered to sponsor this video. Now this is one of the coolest hack and slash action games I've played on my phone, and you can also check it out right now on any Apple device via the Apple Arcade. What I find really awesome is how fun and addictive the combat feels. Like, you start with a samurai warrior that uses a katana and has some really awesome abilities, but there are other characters you can unlock as you progress in the main story, all with their own unique playstyles and weapons. I also really enjoy how cool the minion system is in this game. Like, you can find these demons and spirits, over 100 of them in total to collect and use in combat, even combine for some really crazy powerful effect. So definitely go ahead, check the game out. Again, it's available right now via the Apple Arcade on any Apple device, and also make sure you follow the official World of Demons Twitter and Instagram pages that you can find in the links down below. Anyway, starting things off, things are looking more and more promising. So far so good. It seems that the wipe issue has been resolved, or at the very least the overwhelming majority of the problems with the wipe issue have been resolved going forward, and they should no longer occur anymore. We will continue monitoring for any fresh reports over the weekend and are still aiming to share news about the inventory and character restoration process early next week. And yes, I know there's a ton of you guys that have been putting the game aside because you were not able to play on your mains anymore. Maybe you're locked out of it, maybe your inventory got wiped before yesterday's update. It totally makes sense why you wouldn't want to play the game anymore. Even Scott over on Twitter put it really nicely. Personally, I can't bring myself to play. Just the slightest bit of info about restoration would really put a lot at ease. Not asking when, but what sort of things can we expect? Is this going to be a month-long process or just all at once, etc, etc. Losing inventory took it out of me, so yeah, I get the frustration, but you needn't be concerned. It won't be a month-long process. The reason we haven't yet shared further details is also because our teams are continually looking into improving, optimizing, and testing it. So here is hoping that everything goes according to plan. But another pretty big question is the stash wipe restoration also a thing? Because I got a stash wipe for almost 60 legendaries, but nothing happened to my equipment slash inventory, one of the users said over on Twitter. And of course, our restoration process involves looking for all of the wiped items, whether they are in the stash or in the inventory, which makes sense. Totally let me know down below if this bug affected you. Like, was your stash deleted and your inventory intact, or was it the other way around? Because it sounds pretty strange to put it like that. Now, as you may or may not know, this restoration is going to be separate from the player compensation that the team announced a while ago, because that's going to be a different kind of reward that also gives us a bunch of legendaries, or at least one legendary that was confirmed, and some kind of emote on top. And Vitter over on Twitter asked, the legendary reward for playing since day one, are we getting that as well? So we want to ensure that the restoration is successful first before we deploy the appreciation package. I still want them to reconsider what that appreciation package is going to include. I think that only one legendary or only one item and only one of those emotes for the people who pretty much lost their inventories since last week is not going to cut it. I think that these people were kind of locked out of their main characters and possibly even out of the game for a too far long of a time to only get one single item on top of that. Maybe providing some special kind of reward on top would also be helpful, because in these situations, honestly, in my opinion, if you're completely locked out of your progression, a more appropriate kind of response would be a full-on refund. So they should maybe bring up those rewards, in-game rewards, to a bit of a higher level rather than just one small little item here. Speaking of getting stuck in a loop, if you're trying to connect to a character that has been affected by a wipe issue and it gets you like this error that gets you kicked out of the servers, then that is pretty much intended, as I've explained previously. So this will also be resolved with our upcoming restoration when that is going to happen. Again, hopefully starting Monday or Tuesday. But there's also a follow-up patch that is going to be larger in size and will contain a lot of the fixes that were left behind or forgotten, or some other fixes that will be added on top. And of course, this discussion right here came in the context of a different issue that was supposed to be fixed a while ago. So if you play with the Trickster right now, you're probably familiar with the fact that Hunt the Prey doesn't always work, and instead of getting teleported behind the enemy, you just don't get teleported at all. It's only the effect that happens, but you still get to be stuck in place. I would also maybe add on top the fact that enemies seem to react way too fast when you use Hunt the Prey against them, as they essentially preemptively do a melee attack against you as you're in the middle of the teleportation. So by the way, that's also going to be added as a fix, but in the meantime, this was supposed to be fixed about 10 days ago, and even initially it was marked as fixed, but that is only going to get added in a follow-up patch that was announced yesterday. So we are actually bundling lower priority fixes into a larger follow-up patch, while the patches released so far have been focused on addressing severe issues. If we were to roll lower priority fixes into our previous patches, it would have extended their required testing time greatly and they wouldn't have released as early as they did. Which makes sense. Of course, these aren't the only issues that we have at hand. There's a number of other skills in the game that work in really strange ways. I would also say a number of mods that either don't work correctly or at all. They either don't trigger or have really strange internal cooldowns that they shouldn't have in the first place, which prevents them from working on additional targets. But there are too many to cover in just one video, so I'm gonna leave it at it for now. If you play as a Trickster, especially the Trickster right now, you're going to encounter quite a few of these for this class, even though otherwise it works pretty great. Now, on a final note, I do want to talk about a really interesting topic that we have right here in regards to, well, devs commenting on solo revives in solo expeditions. We've talked about this issue previously, how multiplayer has, well, a revive that you can do every now and then, but for some reason it's completely skipped in the single player. Why would that be the case? Now, there are many explanations for why that might be the case, but the one that we got from the devs, there's another dev interview right here, really doesn't make any sense in many people's opinion, and honestly in mine as well. So Kotaku pretty much went in and asked the team, and they got a response via email. So the short version, it's about conveying different levels of intensity between the game's solo and multiplayer modes. So here is actually the explanation. Single player is intended to be a bit less intense than multiplayer, and we wanted players to take a different approach to combat. We like presenting combat arenas as a sort of a combat puzzle for players to solve. If we were to introduce self-revives in single player, it would allow players to use that mechanic to power through fights without having to really think about it. Whereas we want them to stop and consider the fight to enemy composition, their builds and skill setup, and potentially make a few runs at it. Also, they later mentioned that we didn't have self-revives to begin with, but in playtesting we found that because of the intensity of the action, players often weren't able to help their teammates in time because they were under a lot of pressure and too busy fighting. Now, personally, I have a few gripes with this explanation. On one side, it mentions that there are some kind of puzzles in the game, when in reality, there's not really any puzzles to speak of unless you consider the pillars moving as puzzles, but I wouldn't really qualify them as anything more than control points, since essentially they don't require you to solve anything like a normal puzzle would. On the other hand, it also mentions that you have to consider some kind of strategy, like with enemy composition, build and skill setup. The only thing you have to consider is your build and skill setup. Make it as strong as possible, because the only thing you care about the enemy is how fast it dies at your feet. That's literally it, with many of the builds that are currently viable in the endgame. Personally, I would approach this from 2 points of view, depending which one is more preferable. One of them is the way you get notified when one teammate dies. I think that a better solution would be to add a much better sound effect accompanied by a much better visual indication, like in this case a better outline or maybe an icon on top of the teammate that is downed, as well as a ping sound that is noticeable in the middle of a combat and distinguishable enough so that you can easily notice them in these situations. Second of all, I would completely rework the way the revive works and change it into a meter that doesn't reset when you get interrupted in the middle of a revive. That literally makes it impossible for a two-party team to revive each other because you simply get overwhelmed and interrupted by the huge amount of enemies that surround you, which makes revives impossible. So in this situation, why not address the revive timer, which was the main culprit from the very beginning, and transform it into a revive meter, which honestly is the natural progression that most games with co-op add in their games anyway. So in this case, instead of having it reset every time you get interrupted, make it remain where it was left in the progress bar and make it so that players can resume it at a later date or when they get to take down a few of the enemies or get to run away and come back, which would make a lot more sense. And in that situation, you can even remove the entirety of the self-revive, and that will no longer be an issue because reviving teammates is no longer a problem for the remaining ones. Also, on the same note, I also semi-agree with the fact that if you get a self-revive in the single player, that helps you tremendously to push forward, even though you might not be fully ready for that challenge tier. Like if you play on CT15 right now, it's so easy. I literally did not die in over a week at this point, but you know what, I might be wrong on this one. Maybe it's just my opinion. Maybe I'm blinded by the fact that I'm already in the end game and forgot the struggle up until that point. So that is why I would really love to see your opinion in the comment section down below. Thanks so much for watching though, and I'll see you guys in the next one.